From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. A production of iHeartRadio.
Welcome back to the show. My name is Matt.
My name is Noel.
They call me Ben. We're joined as always with our super producer, Andrew the Triforce Howard. Most importantly, you are you. You are here. That makes this the stuff they don't want you to know. We couldn't be more excited for this and a little bit disturbed, to be honest with you folks. If you are a longtime conspiracy realist, you've doubtlessly noticed the same thing we all have, a strident uptick in reports of mysterious things happening in the sky. Unidentified lights, mysterious objects, drones that appear to come from somewhere unknown and return to an unknown place. And, you know, I was thinking about it. For a lot of us, it's kind of like a headline, right? Or a soundbite. You read and maybe forget. But
and for others, it becomes a full-on obsession, right?
Right. Yes, exactly. You know, for many of us in the audience tonight, there's a story, an incident you witnessed that you can't explain. You check with friends and neighbors. As the years go on, you may make theories of your own. But every so often, an intrepid observer goes a step further, taking on a quest to figure out what on or off Earth is actually happening up there in the sky. And you guys, in today's interview, we are joined with an investigator who did just that, the one and only Gabe Lenners, the creator and host of OBSCURUM, Invasion of the Drones. Gabe, thank you so much for joining us.
Guys, it's so great to be here. This has been a long time coming, and I can't wait to dive in with you.
Can I just say, Gabe, that when I was listening to the first episode of Invasion of the Drones, as a synthesizer nerd, I thought it was really appropriate that the first sound you hear is a synth drone. And I was like, that was very appropriate. So well done on the music portion as well.
Hey, we did it for you, 100%.
Thanks. Yeah. I appreciate it.
Literal and sonic drones.
I felt seen or heard.
All right, guys, let's set the scene because on this show, we have discussed multiple drone sightings in multiple parts of the world and at multiple times. But in OBSCURUM, we start pretty clearly in late 2019, right around Christmas time, in a place called Phillips County, Colorado. Gabe, take us to that place, what you're doing at that time, why this even pings on your radar.
Yeah, so I originally grew up in this small town in Nebraska, which, you know, consequently is about 30 miles away from where these sightings first began. I live in Los Angeles, but I was going home for the holidays, and I was sitting there with my family, and we were getting ready for dinner when we get this knock at the door, and it is this police officer who, we were talking earlier, I used to chase storms and go out with him and actually spot severe weather in the area, but this time he came and he said, Gabe, you know what? There's some weird things happening over people's farms, not only in our county in Nebraska, but out there in Phillips County. There are all of these flashing lights just hovering all over the prairie, and no one knows whose they are or who they belong to. And I think maybe this is something you should look into. And from that moment in OBSCURUM Invasion of the Drones that you guys heard, I just started asking questions to try to get to the bottom of what was going on. But more importantly, you know, we've all seen flashing lights in the sky, and it's very hard to justify what something is when you look up into the sky and see it. And I thought, why would these things actually be flying? And that's what I wanted to look into, the different theories as to the why more than the what, especially at the beginning.
Gabe, I love how you just kind of casually dropped that used to be a storm chaser back in the day.
Yeah, you know.
You get in a situation.
You know.
Yeah, this is one of the first off, I've got to say, I love how you chat with your mom in the show, because there's this, this is a genuine, thorough investigation into unexplained phenomena. It's also, I would say, an exploration of how people react to the unexplained. And that's the crucial piece of this. This is a hometown area for you. And I am so excited from the jump where this guy, you know, shows up at your house, and I think it's kind of late at night, and says, okay,
Absolutely.
I thought you might dig into this. Did you immediately go chasing the lights, or how did you process this story?
I thought he was crazy at first. I thought, I've grown up in this area. You know, I've seen pretty much everything there is to see, I feel like, in this part of the world growing up, because I would be out there on those back roads chasing storms, you know, and running track out there in high school and different things. And I thought, what could possibly be in the sky? Because you got to picture this area. It's a remote area, northeast Colorado, southwest Nebraska, a town of about 2,000 people. And you look up into the sky, and it's about 10 or 11 at night, and you see all of these, you know, I mean, I saw myself SUV-sized drones and then smaller ones surrounding them. It's just something that's straight out of a sci-fi movie, honestly, and not something I would ever expect. And yeah, I thought someone has to be flying something, or this is just, you know, a crazy coincidence. I really didn't know what to expect until I drove out there and looked up and saw these for myself.
So Gabe, you actually saw like the smaller drones and mother drone kind of situation in the sky?
There's a great scene where you're kind of experiencing it in real time, and you described it beautifully. But yeah, I think that's about right. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm about the biggest realist you're going to get. I'm a journalist and a producer. And, you know, I always go where the evidence is to ask the questions, to get answers. And yeah, I went out there and looked up into the sky and saw, you know, what appeared to be some type of mothership drone, if you will, about 200 to 300 yards off the ground. And then you have all of these kind of smaller red and white flashing lights surrounding this large kind of orb-like light, which is literally just hovering above the prairie for hours, it seemed, on end.
Whoa.
And unlike a lot of people who may have, and no judgment here, but there are a lot of people who might see something strange in the sky and just file it away as, you know, a campfire story or something to talk about on Thanksgiving. But you also learn this is not some sort of one-off sighting with, say, a single witness. There are multiple witnesses, not just around town in Imperial, but also in nearby Phillips County, Colorado. And you start talking to locals, right? Start checking in with other people. Could you describe those initial conversations and what the townsfolk were saying when you asked them?
Absolutely. This was something where, you know, this whole event was referred to as the Colorado-Nebraska drone mystery, and people were seeing all of these drones over such a large area at the same time. They weren't just seeing a couple in their backyard. I mean, when I went out there that first night, just to give you some perspective, I mean, the very first time I looked up and saw this, I saw like 15 to 20 of these things. There were at least a couple motherships, or if that's what you want to call them, sitting there. And then you have, you know, I would say 15 at least of these other flashing lights surrounding it. I mean, this isn't something you could just shake off because it was there, and you have not a lot of cell service. It's dark. It's in the middle of the night. You're in the pasture. And this just isn't something you normally see. And yeah, when I talked to locals, that's one of the first things I did in the, you know, the first couple episodes of the podcast, because, you know, I'd grown up with these people, and I knew they wouldn't be just making stuff up for their health, for lack of a better word, and telling me stories, you know, that weren't true, because I've known these people forever, and not just those people, but people in the surrounding counties. And one of the things that really stood out to me early was how similar these accounts were in a large area. We're talking, you know, hundreds of miles in north central Nebraska, all the way down to northwestern Kansas and eastern Colorado. And, you know, these people aren't talking to each other every day, but yet they're experiencing something very, very strange in the night sky.
Man.
You know, I'm mentioning the storm chasing stuff. You did actually go to college for meteorology, correct?
Yeah. So I originally went to the University of Oklahoma to study weather. I actually ended up getting a broadcast journalism degree, but I've always had this very strong fascination with weather and studying the science behind it. And that was one of the things, too, if you think about these drones in the wintertime, and, you know, in that area, you have strong winds. Just to geek out for a second, and the
Sure.
upper levels of the atmosphere, right? You have really strong winds with low pressure systems that kind of move through with heavy snow, blizzards, and these drones would be out there in sub-zero temperatures, flying around for hours on end. And that was one of the things, one of the police officers, I think it was in episode 4 that I was talking to, saw the winds were very strong that night and the temperatures very cold. And these drones were up for, 6 to 8 hours plus at a time and wouldn't have to come down even because of the cold weather.
And you're speaking to, just to dovetail on that point, you also speak to professional business owners who work with drones, and you ask them at a couple of points, would you guys fly a drone out in these conditions? And if so, why? And I love there's this honest tone, you're talking to the experts. And I believe upon re-listening multiple times, people say, at least for their business, it would be a bad idea to fly a drone, with snow cover and with these treacherous winds and so on.
Well, and also it seems like another example of when there are sightings like this, it just seems to be presenting technology that isn't available, widely. And I wonder if the drone experts spoke to that, like even the logistics of them being able to be out in these conditions for so long.
Yeah. One of the ones that I talked to had to do with agriculture. And when you have drones, it's becoming more and more common to spray different fields instead of having a spray plane do it with drones. Technology is evolving so fast. But one of the interesting things I learned was that, if someone was to do this, they would only stay up for a very short period of time, and they can put these long arms on these drones to extend while they're flying over the fields. And this wouldn't be something that would be on a large scale, 2, likely be happening at night, and 3, definitely not during the winter.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, let alone just how these drones take flight, right? The drones we're aware of that we see most often that you can go out and buy right now as a consumer are copter type, right? They use multiple blades, often 4 or more, to go up, and then they can use those blades as they turn and tilt to move left and right, basically as they're flying. The other type we know about are the more military style ones that we saw during the Second Iraq War, that are almost like a plane or a prop plane that have instead of a helicopter style rotor blade, it's turned horizontally and allows flight by going forward using wings. These things, did you notice anything like that when you physically saw the drones in the sky? Like any type of how they were actually flying?
So the show is called Invasion of the Drones because that's what everyone has referred to as what these aircraft are. But I mean, I can say, seeing them, I could never see anything that would allude to the fact that it wasn't, was actually a drone specifically. I never saw things flying because they were at night. And a lot of the people I interviewed would say, oh yeah, the drones. And what people started calling them. But you could never, in my opinion, outside of their movement, we've seen videos of, UAPs that have been captured over the ocean by Air Force pilots and everything else. They didn't move in that type of manner, but you couldn't tell they were specifically drones outside of the way they kind of moved. The only thing that I could really justify, and a lot of the people I talked to, was that these were lights in the sky moving in weird type of patterns that weren't consistent with airplanes, helicopters, anything of the sort.
I love that too, because this is not a spoiler to the narrative here, but there is a moment that really stood out to me where you're speaking with someone who has an interest in figuring out what's going on, and they straight up tell you, they say something like, Gabe, we're calling them drones so that we don't sound crazy, right? So maybe drone is a word they put on a thing.
Well, you have an interview with somebody, I believe in the first episode, or maybe it was a soundbite in one of your trailers, talking about the origin of the use of the term drone. I think it was actually in the last episode, the most recent one, how even that as a concept was for the purpose of kind of like calling these things, this technology, something that didn't sound too scary or too terrifying. I don't know. I think drone is kind of ominous personally, but I wonder if you could speak to that as well, what you learned about kind of the history of the idea of drones.
Yeah, I mean, as far as my learning about like drones and stuff for this podcast, the term kind of drone started to be used a lot during the first Gulf War, which we kind of get into in, I think it's the first or second episode just a bit, but that kind of became synonymous. And, you know, like you said, is drone the new and more casual term for UFO? I don't know. I would be willing to say maybe based on all these drone sightings that people see, because it does make you not sound crazy, for lack of lack of a better word.
Right.
If you're like that drone out there, you know, I saw some drones. Really, what did you see? Was that a plane? Was it a helicopter? Was it
a series
UAP?
of lights?
Yeah.
Right. That's,
you know,
and to stick on that moment too about the past, you do something that I think we all found incredibly impressive, which is you say, well, let's step back, right? Let's scope out through time, because nothing, occurs in a vacuum. So you start looking into any possible precedents or earlier reports in the area. Could you tell us a little bit about what you found, or the people you spoke to regarding that?
Yeah, that was one of the most interesting things that I again had no clue what I would find out when I started talking to people. But if you go back in history, in Southwest Nebraska, it is one of the areas with one of the first recorded UFO sightings in modern history. And there's even a lot of press from the 1800s. Now, how factual it actually is remains to be seen. But the story goes there were some cowboys that were out on a ranch, and they're sitting there watching over the cattle, and this blazing ball falls to the earth, and they all turn and go see what it is. And, they see this cylinder-shaped craft. And a couple days later, if I remember the story correctly, it rained and it started to kind of like dissipate and go away. But all of these news outlets in the area reported on this. Now, some people say it's a hoax, some people don't, but there's enough recordings in different areas that something did happen there. Now, the specifics of it, we're not quite sure because that was a long time ago. But then also in the podcast, there are a couple people who I know personally who had seen, strange things in the sky in the same location where these drones were being seen. And in one of the cases, actually, he described his grandparents being out there on the prairie and seeing these spherical balls of light, which a lot of people referred to as the drones, hovering over their farm. And that was, decades earlier. And so weird things have definitely been seen in the area. And this was not the first time.
Jeez. Around this time when you're talking to people and you're finding these earlier reports, you're also talking to people who are reporting some pretty strange things in real time, like in 2019, 2021. There's one report, and I guess a photo that's related to it, of some kind of green substance associated with some of these sightings. Did anything ever come of that?
Nothing came of that, but it was one of the really interesting things that transpired in the first couple of days of this drone mystery. Because how the story goes is there were these weird green blobs that were showing up out on county roads, and it
was the ooze.
It was the ooze. It was the ooze, and people, were convinced that these drones were dropping these things, and they were related. And I mean, I'll just go ahead and tell you about it. It's a track log. It's a soil PAM track log, and these are what a lot of people use in agriculture and hang on their pivots, and it, I guess, provides some type of nutrients. I mean, it looks like it came from another world. If you see one of these things, it's green and mesh wrapped, and it has this green, ooze that's like frozen in it. I mean, it looks weird. It's very weird looking, but
it looks,
But so much.
I've got to say, it does look weird.
It looks weird if you Google it. Yeah. But but yeah, the sheriff's department was, perplexed by this, so much so that they tested it for methamphetamines and weren't quite sure what it was and thought it
It's
could
got to
be
be meth.
it's got to be related to the drones. So, but it ended up being that, in that specific case, we were able to, figure out that it wasn't. So
We're going to pause here to let the sponsors drone on for a second. Kidding. We'll be right back.
And we've returned. Let's jump right back into our conversation with Gabe.
Now the story is escalating. Now there are going to be reports that the drones are not just, flitting around, having a light show, but may also be dropping physical objects. And one thing you do consistently is speak to law enforcement and authorities at multiple, local, regional, even federal level. And at every turn, you encounter something that is so common in stories of this nature or in experiences like this, wherein people will say, okay, I saw a thing, but I want to be really careful about how I describe it and how I will be perceived in society based on, the way I articulate my experience. And then you come to a point where you start logically asking, well, where could an aircraft come from? And it brings us to one of our favorite returning characters on this show, the Denver International Airport.
Yes. Best mural game in the airport world. No question about it. Nothing weird in any of those murals.
No. I mean, there's so much, you hear so much about that place. When I hear the airport, I just think of ongoing construction, because every time I'm in there, they're always like fixing something. And there's always a line, and you always have to walk like so far to get to your check-in point, because they're always fixing something. Something's always being built at that airport. Seems like
we hear a lot about that airport, Atlanta airport, and there's like one or two other ones that are always under construction. I think LaGuardia.
LaGuardia is finally done though. LaGuardia is really nice now. Finally,
it is nice. It is,
man. Whenever I hear Denver Airport, I picture that one mural where there's this big, creepy, hulking dude in like a green rubber suit with a gas mask, swinging a saber that acts as sort of the like dividing line in this mural composition, and then there are all these like starving African children kind of like that are being sliced at by this. It's very weird. It's like something out of Pink Floyd's The Wall.
Yeah. Because it's on the wall.
It's on the wall.
I did hear they may have taken that mural down.
Oh, it's a good one.
Maybe you sent the right email, Noel.
Yeah, finally. Yeah.
But
filled out the right comment card.
The reason we're bringing this up here, Gabe, is because with that logical step, you're also in your investigation, you're kind of opening a door, right? And you're never telling people what you think is happening, like what they should believe, but you are asking people. And with that, we have to get the takes, because you talk to people from so many demographics. What are some of the theories that you heard?
I mean, I heard a lot of theories. I mean, and that's one of the most interesting things, as you hit on earlier. It's a case study into how people do react to the unknown and how they perceive what's going on in the world around them. And more importantly, what they want to believe about that in the future. As far as like, some of the craziest theories, obviously, like a lot of people are saying, oh, this is the government. This is the government doing this, And I can say, I think the government has a job to serve and protect. And, there's things we shouldn't know or be aware of. One of the most interesting things early on, and you hear this in episode 4, with that theory is, and I talked to a lot of people as this thing was really kind of unfolding in the first few days. So I would say that with that type of theory, I think more than, people are like, oh, stuff is being hidden. I think there was just a lot of confusion. I don't really think anyone really knew what was actually happening. here, because, some of those people wouldn't have agreed to probably talk to me if they were like, oh, there's nothing to see here. And a lot of times and you guys are probably experts on this a lot more than me, but a lot of times when the military seems to be testing something or doing something new, it's kind of a wink and a nod, like, oh, that may be us over there. And like, there's not a lot of questions about it. And it's just kind of like, okay, it happened. It's over. We may have been doing something there, but you can't say for sure. But one of the things that, with this is people went on the record early to say, this is not us. We are not doing this. We are not involved with this. And they didn't have to release, statements and just say that. And could it be someone or some, group or groups that we're not even aware of? Of course it could be. But, for the most part, you just don't really see that. And you saw that a lot in New Jersey as well, where people would go on the record and say, hey, it's not us. We're not doing this. These aren't us. Let's get to the bottom of this mystery together. So that was one of the big, theories specifically that people thought early. And then, of course, you had the whole kind of alien UFO theory where there were strange things happening around where people live, like out in the country. You can't,
For sure.
you can't discount what some of those people said, but I mean, just it's kind of just like the real upside down, real life Stranger Things type of scenario where a whole bunch of weird things were going on at the same time. And you heard that officer say, 10 miles east of Denver International Airport. I mean, that's not some guy. I mean, that's a police officer who's
Right.
in a big county in Colorado. And I can't remember his title, but he may have even been, I can't remember, but he was fairly high up. And I mean, he's telling you this isn't like some random person on the street, so yeah.
Well, I think one thing that you mentioned early on in the series is that the drone sightings in New Jersey recently have kind of brought this whole drone spotting thing maybe back into the zeitgeist. And one thing that I thought was interesting when that was being reported on was this idea that like drones beget more drones. Like you have a handful of drone sightings, and all of a sudden, every Tom, Dick, and Harry are sending their consumer drones up to check it out, which may well have led to the kind of saturation point of all of those drones, not just a couple. And I'm wondering if you saw anything like that with this story that you're exploring.
Yeah, I mean, there were people who were talking about taking their own drones up. I mean, there weren't the sheer number of people, obviously, that live on the East Coast, as in the middle part of Nebraska, and so you didn't see this on a big on a big scale, just because people weren't living there. And you can drive anywhere and still see the drones, the mysterious drones, if you will, and there would be no one within 15 to 20 miles in any direction. And so it wasn't like their drones were getting caught up with the other ones. Now, I was on the ground in New Jersey at the height of all that craziness. I found myself there. And that was a little different situation where, it did seem like there were all these reports of drones early. And then, with the flight paths of JFK and LaGuardia and people taking hobbyist drones out, and probably, the military and local law enforcement having their drones up at the same time, it kind of created this circus in the sky, if you will. And you don't really know what was actually happening there.
Ooh, I love that. Circus in the sky. Yeah, writing that one down. I've got, if we can talk about this, just to stick on this for a moment longer, you are speaking with law enforcement. You're speaking with aviation professionals as well. We're talking with the FAA and so on. All right. So everybody seems to agree that there's something up there, right? Mm-hmm. There's something happening. There's no one who says, Gabe, you're crazy. This interview is over or anything like that. But could you tell us a little bit more about just the basic legality of drones for anybody who hasn't operated one before? How do drone enthusiasts in general comply with the law? What's the nature of a no-fly zone? How close can these get to the airport? Where can they go? What happens?
There's altitude restrictions as well, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah.
Yeah. This is something that continues to get fine-tuned. The FAA has had this feature, if you will, and there's a lot of gray area of having it tagged and having to register your drone, and what do you need to do? Do you have to do that to fly a drone? Do you not, to be able to track them? No one, in my opinion, no one really knows what's happening with those. But typically with the drone, like in the middle part of the country, the drones are supposed to be below 400 feet. And when you get above that, that's where you run into problems. And these were low, many times 200 to 300 feet off the ground. And when you get into the area of an airport, they are no fly zones. And some of the people that I interviewed said that if they flew hobbyist drones near like a small airport in Southwest Nebraska, Northeast Colorado, Northwest Kansas, their drone would come down if they entered that airspace, because it was like, especially if it was a consumer drone. But then I also talked to other people whose, their drones weren't impacted by that. But you're generally not supposed to fly, obviously, within an airport anywhere, even if it's a smaller one. But the restrictions are lax, and it's very clear that technology is outpacing what's happening with drone development in all areas of the world, essentially. And it's very hard to regulate, from the people who I've talked to, who's flying these drones and what you can actually do about them once they're in the sky, if they do appear to be doing something that is nefarious or is skeptical.
Yeah, I keep remembering that line. Just to add this in, I keep remembering that line about the FAA not having an enforcement arm.
Yeah.
That's a real thing.
Ask yourself the question. When you were listening, I'm not sure how far you got through, but there are all these reports of things flying around during the Colorado drone mystery. Say a local law enforcement official calls and reports it, and say it gets to the FAA, what would they tangibly do in that moment? Because by that time, the report's been called in. The thing's probably not at that specific point, and they aren't there. You can't fault them, because what are they physically going to do unless they can, unless they know where that drone's originating from and they could take it down remotely? It's kind of just a weird, tricky situation all around, I feel like.
For sure.
So let's get back to some of the sightings that specifically the Navy has been seeing and finally reporting on and telling the public about. So back in 2022, I think it was, there's a former naval pilot named Ryan Graves who testified before Congress. And he describes, basically from 2013 on, he and other Navy fighter pilots who would fly machines like F-18s, they would encounter specific UAP, what they described as UAP, as these black or dark gray cubes inside translucent spheres. And they would see these in the sky as they're flying, really fast in F-18 and other even more advanced craft. Then in Obscurum, we hear a story from a hunter, a man named Alex Peterson, who he has his weapon, a rifle that has a thermal scope on it. And he's looking through that thermal scope, and he describes something really similar down by the water. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that was one of the things I didn't think I would encounter, but I actually, I've talked to him multiple times throughout, putting this story together, and he, in the trailer and some of the different things you've seen in video, I'm sure online, that's actually raw video from his scope of his gun as this thing is approaching him. So it's not like everyone's like, where's the video? Show us the video. But this thing was, it was approaching. And if I remember correctly, he described it as a box with like orange in the middle of it. And it was, and this was approaching him, and he had to make the decision of what he was going to do. And he obviously didn't do it because that's illegal. You never want to do that.
But to actually shoot down the drone from the ground, right? Yeah. Bad idea.
Not even for social media likes.
No, results may vary.
And we're using language. We're calling it a drone, but that doesn't sound like a dang drone to me.
Sounds like ghost lights, like swamp gas or one of those kind of
swamp gases. That's my favorite. Everyone's like, oh, it's swamp gas.
Cubed swamp gas.
I know. I need to look at what the meteorological, setup for swamp gas is specifically, so I can debunk that one in real time.
Yeah, we're happy to throw our hats in the ring on that one, Gabe.
Yeah,
Because,
tell me.
yeah, we're super pro swamp gas over here as well.
Well, the theory with that is that it's some kind of gases that could theoretically ignite and cause fire
Right.
in the sky,
Illumination,
as it's described.
Like, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But then you have to think about the altitude, right, or the origin of the gas and the mix. I mean, that's the thing that I think is very fair about this investigation. We're hearing different voices with different perspectives that sometimes conflict. We'll pause here for a word from our sponsors, and we'll be back with Gabe.
And we're back.
Everybody is trying to do their level best, right? From civilian witnesses who are saying, look, let me tell you what I saw as accurately as I recall seeing it. Here's any evidence I have, all the way up to, a really interesting meeting in Brush, Colorado, that you share, you share some accounts of this. It's a strategy meeting, right? With multiple stakeholders, we could call them. Whatever people are seeing out there in this area, it has risen to a level or risen to a threshold such that federal and local law enforcement are getting together to figure out what's going on. Could you tell us a little bit about their interactions and about this meeting in Colorado?
Yeah, I tried to get into this meeting, and this meeting happened a few weeks after the majority of these sightings really started, ramping up. And when I started talking to people, I wasn't even sure this meeting happened or was going to happen, but it did in fact happen. And basically, all of these sightings in Northeast Colorado, people were on the brink because no one was doing anything. And so the FAA supposedly came to this meeting and set it up. The Colorado Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management was there. The Air Force was there. All these local law enforcement officers from different areas in all these different states had a big powwow in Brush, Colorado to try to figure out what they were going to do and form a task force. Now, as we later learn from people at the meeting, and one of the guys who was going to actually lead the task force formation, it never really happened. So there was a whole bunch of talk at this meeting, and no one really took it to the next step. And it kind of goes back and forth. Was it the FAA's job to do this, or was it the local officials' job to do this? And, if you talk to the FAA people, they'll say, well, the reports just kind of stopped. And if you talk to the local people, they'll say the FAA dropped the ball and didn't really push this forward to get it going. But for lack of a better term, it never really got off the ground. And there weren't a lot of answers following the meeting, in fact. And so, a lot of people say the reports just dropped off, but did people become desensitized to just seeing them and not report them as much? Because I still talk to people who see these things out there, though not on a big scale as they were before. And so there's just a lot of questions surrounding that whole meeting. And I'm still, I hope through this podcast, I get more clarity on that. But I did talk to a lot of people who were there, and it's just, it seems like everyone came together and nothing happened really.
Well, Matt, I mean, you had a buddy, I think, in North Georgia, maybe, who was seeing some strange lights in the sky. And we have, historical reports of very similar things. I mean, probably further back, but like the Phoenix lights, like back in 97 or whatever, very similar reports that usually seem to get traced back to some sort of experimental aircraft. But Matt, what was the deal with your friend?
We can talk about it. I had a friend who was down near Augusta, Georgia, near Fort Eisenhower, and this friend was seeing, orbs, as they're described, of light in the sky, doing kind of weird stuff. And it's very similar. And it actually, the reason why I wanted to talk to you about this is because he started a social media account to, share videos, what he's seeing. And what he found is that once he started sharing stuff, the conversation about what this could be, the possibilities, and then the stronger voices as they come in, the opinions of what this potentially was got weirder and weirder. And then, again, those opinions got stronger and stronger. And you learned a little bit about this in the podcast, right? About what that happens with a couple of different groups. Like, I think it's the Drone Intelligence Center that you speak with someone about, just where once those ideas start being discussed openly, you can believe stranger things, let's say, than what you might normally.
Absolutely. And that was one of the, in the podcast, there were so many people who had different perspectives, and more than like, at the same time of getting to the bottom of this mystery, I really just wanted to document what was actually happening with all these different people and get their perspectives and put it somewhere, because it was just such a weird thing. But yes, I mean, when people don't have answers about the unknown, it's very clear that they start, they can take that perception and make it into something that it may or may not be. Maybe they're right, maybe they're not. But, especially when people are in kind of siphon groups and in remote areas, if you're around a group of people, and we get into this in one of the episodes with a psychologist or a sociologist from Stanford, but if you get into the groupthink mentality and, you see something in the sky and the group of people validates what you saw in the sky, even if what you saw in the sky is not at all what you saw in the sky, and you have everyone else telling you that's what you saw, then, you're probably likely going to believe what that group of people, for lack of a better term, says over time. And so, yeah, kind of what you said is true.
Especially with the, the social dynamics come into play, right? And I believe our sociologist also points out it's not just a group consensus building. It's also guided by perceptions of authority, right? And guided by perceptions of, this is a person I trust for some other reason. Therefore, what they're saying here, even if I didn't originally think that, it's going to inspire me to reassess my initial experience.
100%. Yeah.
I mean, and so many people just don't have a strong enough perspective that it's really easy for the loudest or most confident voice in the room or in one of these discussions to steer them, to allow people to kind of like have their perspective shifted, because they need that, and sometimes even if someone is coming at it with authority, it doesn't mean that they actually have the background or the expertise to make those kinds of claims. And I think we see that all the time in the echo chamber that is sort of online conspiracy chatter.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I'm not in that space as much as, you guys are and stuff, but based on the limit, you can kind of see that as well with the New Jersey sightings and other similar events of that,
Oh, Chinese weather balloon. Shout out, to our boy from a few years back.
Yeah.
But then you've got stories, and forgive me, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but the person who has an inquisitive mind, who is going out there on social media trying to, have other people vet his work, basically, as he's taking videos and making recordings and saying, hey, I noticed that when I play certain music, these lights turn blue. And then when I play other music, they flash other lights. Like, amazing. What do you guys think? Like, that's a really inquisitive mind trying to test variables. And so I just imagine somebody like that and wanting so hard to prove scientifically something.
Wasn't that just a regular dude, or was that an expert? I'm remembering the soundbite, but not the identity of this person.
So that's the leader of this group called the Drone Hunters, basically formed, and it was this group, this social media group, and they would go out and they would band together and really try to study these. They were concerned locals, but with that story, I thought to myself, just like you, I mean, I'm skeptical at the beginning, and so I called the sheriff's department in that specific county. And it was very interesting in that interaction, because the guy told me he would go out there regardless of, the lights and like the music and everything else. I was like, could I verify that someone else who lived in the area was seeing the same type of things at the time, and continues to see things. So I called the sheriff in that specific county in western or in eastern Colorado. And, it was very interesting because I got this assistant at the sheriff's office, and she was like, oh, let me go ask. Because I said, hey, I'm looking into some of those mysterious drone sightings that had been reported by people who live in your area. Would I be able to talk to the sheriff? Or people still seeing these? She waited. She put me on hold, and she came back and she's like, there's nothing that's been seen here lately, and the sheriff doesn't want to talk about it. And I was like, okay. I was like, okay.
Yeah.
And so then I found people who kind of lived outside of that town where the sheriff lived and called them. And they're like, oh, yeah, we see these orb-like lights, multiple nights a week still, ever since like the drone mystery really kicked off. And my son was out and he was getting the mail. He saw him the other night. And so then the guy's story is like, oh, someone else who lives where he does is seeing these at the same time. Not saying, the weird nature of them, but they are seeing something in the sky at the same time. And so take that information however you want, but it's very curious.
That's the thing that gets me too. In the absence of transparency, speculation naturally thrives, right? And there's not anybody. It seems in the story there are people who have strident beliefs of their perspective of what they've seen, but we don't see anybody pulling a cynical grift. You know what I mean? We don't see anybody starting a UFO based cult or anything. People are hopefully. People are trying
that we know of.
That we know of. Right. People are trying to figure this out together. And in doing so, we could make an argument that perhaps beliefs become more extreme when you have people kind of bubbled in one space.
For sure.
Did you run into anybody who had serious contradictions about another person's perspective regarding the drone mystery?
Yeah, that's a great question. I honestly didn't, because it was such a widespread thing. It's not like someone saw something once and then the other person's like, well, I didn't see it. I don't believe that, because so many people were seeing things at the same time. I mean, one group of people who, my family is friends with even rented a party bus and went and had a party and went and had a drone watching party and was driving around. Just,
it's my idea of a good time
during the time,
so cool.
just for fun, for sheer fun. And so it wasn't like it was a thing where people were just seeing one or two here or there. I mean, they were seeing them all over the place. And the thing, I looked back at, some of my notes and stuff, and one of the first reports that came in outside of Phillips County was actually in my county, Chase County, and it was the sheriff's department there that reported seeing 50 of these things, before people were even calling them in. And so, I mean, and they sent that to everyone, and so it wasn't even the people who were leading the sightings at the very beginning. So,
man. Can you tell us who this Matthew Spencer guy is? It sounds like a voice actor when you hear it in the episode. You're like, there's no way this guy talks like that.
Also, can we hang out with him on the party bus?
So I will say to protect his privacy, he was so his part was reread but this is a real guy. He did go on the record. We had to protect him. So yes, there was a voiceover artist reading that specific part. But he is, 100% a real person. He was, according to all of my research, being looked at by the FAA during that time and was reaching out to different newspapers in the area, claiming responsibility for these sightings. And so, I tracked him down. And yeah, it'd been such a long kind of time that had passed. I didn't want to put him on full blast, but this is a guy, and he was being looked at by the FAA for being behind these sightings. And so that it's all 100% part of the weird, wacky story that is the drones.
Well, does he ever say what it could be? Like does he describe what it would be?
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know how far you've listened, but basically he
all the way.
So his thinking was that the specific guy, that there was a UAP in the area, and his life's mission was to study UAP, and he had his own drones that he was like taking up and studying the UAP, and he had a reason to believe that there was a UAP in the vicinity of the drones, and that was why the drones were there, because typically in his experience, if there would be a UAP, drones follow to kind of study it. or study what happened in the area. And that was kind of his assumption and why he was flying his own drones there at the time.
Well, yeah, and that's sort of the
Got
point
it.
that came up around the New Jersey stuff, where it's like a lot of the clutter of it all were maybe hobbyists or other people who were curious who own their own drones, kind of going to check out the initial sightings and then kind of adding to the traffic.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's where he said he was there. And obviously other people did too. He called one of the sheriff's offices in Eastern Colorado, and they alerted the FAA from what I found out. And the FAA, it appears looked into him and thought he could be involved in some of these. So
a person of interest,
a person of interest, which you'll have to listen to see what happens. But he's very, but I will say that, the voiceover actor who read that it's a very similar portrayal of the actual guy.
Interesting.
That's it. There is an importance there, right, to protecting someone's anonymity and what their comfort level may be. And I think it returns again and again to this idea of comfort level, right? How comfortable are we sharing this story, or how comfortable are we as, law enforcement professionals talking to Gabe and saying, all right, here's what I can say. Here's what I like. There's at least one time where someone tells you they're not going to speak with you unless they get some paperwork behind it, right? Like a public disclosure request or something of that nature.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of people, that are weary at first, but people who live in that area, like they don't really care about the perception of what people think in this capacity. They'll just say it how it is because, they got to go back to the farm and work and really don't give a crap what, they don't care. They'll just say, oh yeah, I saw this weird thing, happen. I'm not exactly sure where, it is kind of a taboo subject where some people, wouldn't want to talk. But like I said, I mean, if the New Jersey thing doesn't, shed enough light on that, I mean, everyone was talking about it. It's become so mainstream now with these sightings, especially at Air Force bases in the UK and Langley and New Mexico and California and different places that it is becoming, a topic of conversation.
I do have on that note about the locals and the rich picture that you paint in the region, in the town. We're really in the atmosphere here. Just on a personal note, man, how's everybody doing?
Everybody all right?
Yeah.
Everyone's doing well. People are pretty excited about the podcast. They've really enjoyed listening to it because it was such a weird thing, and they all experienced it, together. And so to be able to, put this together and kind of document, every time I would go home, they're like, how's the podcast? How's the thing coming along? It's taken a while to get this off the ground because I do a few other things in LA, and I wanted to kind of see how it would evolve over time too. Cause I talked to the same people, different times, multiple times, throughout the story. And so they're excited about it. Everyone's doing well. And, some people are still seeing drones out there, or what they describe as drones. So it's interesting.
Well, I've said this on the podcast multiple times, but many, many years ago when I was in a band and traveling through Nebraska, I very much saw a triangular kind of kite-shaped, like a architectural measuring tool hovering in the distance. And I had a little camcorder at the time, and I got video of it on like a mini DV tape, which I have lost. I have a bunch of mini DV tapes in a bag somewhere, hopefully one day find. But it was very, very striking, and I will never forget it. And I couldn't tell you what it was, and I haven't really seen anything since that fully explains it. In my kind of rational brain, I like to think maybe I did catch a glimpse of some kind of experimental aircraft, but it was very odd and very similar to the way some of the sightings in Phoenix were described, for the Phoenix Lights scenario, like in the late 90s. But I understand this idea. I think we all do, of seeing something that you can't fully explain and feeling like you're sort of in some small way part of a larger conversation. I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Now I want to see that, but you don't.
Yeah.
I'll find it.
Right,
I'm
right.
gonna
Gotta find
do
it.
some spring
Gabe,
cleaning one day.
I've been asking this guy for years. If you can give me that final push, let's
for
find
real.
the tape. Yeah.
Let's find the tape. Let's find the tape.
I've got one last thing here, Gabe, that I just
Uh-huh.
want to put out there because there's a feeling in the air, and there has been for a long time, that the next big military conflict is on its way. When we're talking about like potentially a world war of some sort, some form or fashion, with all of these massive conflicts that are rising up around the world. And that's probably a feeling that humanity has shared since the end of the Second World War, right? Where we're like, oh, the next one's coming. The next one's coming. You have a feeling, at least I do, that something's coming. The concept of these drones being used, or these whatever these objects are being used to monitor nuclear sites. So sites that in the heartland of the United States, and in places like Nebraska, in places like Colorado, out in the middle of nowhere, missile sites that have nuclear missiles inside them, or once did, that would be launched in the event that there is a need for those things, at least according to the people at the top of the country. What do you think there's any type of experimental aircraft, experimental security forces that are out there being used? Did you see any evidence of that?
I mean, when I was as far as related to the drones, or as far as I mean, I didn't personally see that. I mean, it would be a great area too, and that was one of the theories. Test new things. There's not highly dense area out there, and there's a lot of pasture and stuff. I didn't see anything, personally, in that regard. And when it comes to, like you said, there are missile silos in the area, all kind of scattered throughout the Great Plains, which we delve into in the podcast a little bit. But one of the biggest things for me with these drones, and like all the sightings, and the Pentagon went on the record, about Langley Air Force Base and all of those different things, is that it is a security risk because we don't know what's flying. Obviously, those drones we don't know what capabilities those actually have, and what is behind those. And if you take away the surveillance aspect, but just think about, like, we don't know what's actually flying in the sky, and you've seen all the things that have happened recently with different incidents in the sky. I think it's very important to know what's flying in the sky, and where, and how it could impact different things. I think that's one of the biggest questions.
And that's a commonality among a lot of UAP sightings, is that they sometimes tend to hover around nuclear sites.
Yeah, in the year 2000 with the Disclosure Project, we heard multiple stories of that.
Dating back to post-World War II.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. And there are, I love the point you made earlier, Gabe, where you said, yes, there were newspaper reports from back in the day, from decades past, but I don't know how dependable those were. Right. Were these just sort of, were these reports with maybe a light editorial touch, a little bit of embellishment to sell the paper? That's an open question. But when you see people telling the same story over a window of time, right, and they have little in common other than their location on the planet, and their eyewitness accounts, as flawed as eyewitness accounts can be, when they seem to ring true and hold those commonalities, it's time to really start digging in and exploring the questions, figuring out what is going on with this strange Gordian knot of social dynamics, of technology that outpaces legislation. I feel like I'm TED talking here. Gabe, the main question is, what do you hope listeners take away from the first season of Obscurum?
I hope listeners really are challenged to question the world around them, and step out and figure out what's going on in their local community, and realize that a lot of the stuff they may see on mainstream news is great for a broad perspective, but there are so many things that need to be asked right in your own backyard, and you need to be a citizen journalist and go out there and ask questions. I hope people are inspired to learn more about the stories that really surround them and where they live.
You're here.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah.
So, and I think I alluded to it before with my circus in the sky comment, but I think now more than ever, we have the most things, I think it would be safe to say historically in the sky than ever before. And I think there are a lot of things happening at the same time. in the sky, and to kind of take everything into account. There's helicopters, there's UAP, there's airplanes, there's people flying consumer drones, there's probably military drones, there's probably people doing other types of surveillance, there's probably the electrical company. There's a lot of different things happening at the same time. And I think,
well, and to your point about the FAA's capabilities, like it's getting so crowded out there. I can't imagine being able to know exactly what all of them are doing at all times. It doesn't even seem logistically possible, or maybe that's more something in the realm of military surveillance. But even they would probably be struggling with that.
I mean, it has to be tough. I mean, think about that. I mean, you can go buy a drone and fly it. Yeah. And think if everyone's doing that, how do you regulate that?
They sell them at Barnes and Noble.
Oh, they do? I didn't know that.
Yeah. Act now. It's funny. It's funny you mentioned that, Gabe, because I was texting the guys earlier this morning to see about getting some drones. So I don't know if I got the right takeaway from the show, but one thing we can say for sure is that this is the kind of investigation that needs to happen more often. Because for every 100 of people, right, or every 200 people who see something, right, how many will come forward, or how many will look further into it? One thing I thought about a lot while researching the show and listening through was the threshold that it would take for your average person to actually contact authorities. I don't know how it is over in Nebraska, but in a lot of these United States, that's a pretty high bar.
Yeah.
Right? So that, I think, adds to the reality, the concrete nature of what's happening. And this is where there's something you do at the end of every episode where you and your team ask people who have similar stories or may have some insider information. You ask them to reach out to you all directly. Where's the best way for folks to contact you and your team?
So there's a few different ways you can do that. And that is a great point and I've gotten some interesting people reaching out that have seen, drone things in a lot of areas of the country. And if you want to go on the website, there's a spot where you can share your story. So share your story. You can go on there. You can also hit us up on social media at OBSCURUM. That's OBSCURUM _series. And send me a DM. I'd love to hear from you there. And then the thing too that's been really inspiring with that is to see people commenting on the podcast, on where the podcast is too. And it's almost like a conversation there. And people are saying, "Oh, I saw this. I experienced this." So wherever you listen to your podcast to, if you can comment there, that's a great way for us to see your stories too.
And Gabe, we've listened through episode 8. Are there more episodes coming?
Yeah. So there's one final episode, which is going to come out tomorrow. And then hopefully we're going to, like I said, I was in New Jersey. I literally decided to get on a plane as we were finishing production on these because I didn't know what would happen there. So I flew to New Jersey and was kind of on the ground. I just randomly booked a flight and took a producer with me, and we went all over kind of New Jersey at the height of everything that was happening there. So we're hoping to put more episodes together and release those soon. And the New Jersey content this season is very, very compelling, but the New Jersey stuff, I'm excited to get that out there because there are a lot of high level kind of officials that were kind of talked to at the time. And we were chasing these with the sheriff's department and with the Coast Guard on the Jersey Shore, which is very weird. And so I'm excited for you all to hopefully we'll get those together soon. But I tell you, it's a story that won't go away, but it just gets stranger and stranger.
I love that you're going to have a different palette of accents in this.
Trust me.
Also, folks, Gabe has not given us spoilers, so we're right there with you. We're going to be tuning in as well. Gabe, thanks a million, man. Just full disclosure, because we uphold transparency in everything we do on this show. You're West Coast, we're East Coast. You woke up early for this.
Forgot to say thanks for that.
I just appreciate you guys doing it. It's been so much fun to hang out, and yeah, hopefully we can do it again soon. And Yeah, it is early, but I got some coffee. I'm going to go get some more. So.
Oh, good.
Sweet.
Absolutely. Obscurum, Invasion of the Drones, available now wherever you find your favorite podcast. What a cool guy. Folks, friends and neighbors, fellow conspiracy realists, it's not all the time, or it's not super often, that we get to hang out with a colleague we're interviewing just off air. And it was like the no, you hang up thing. It was a fascinating conversation, one that will only become, I would argue, more important in the near future.
Lovely fellow and super talented storyteller and weatherman, apparently.
Oh, yeah. And there's so much that we didn't cover that exists within that series. We didn't even talk about cattle mutilation.
We didn't talk about the abduction experience.
Yeah.
We didn't.
Well, I mean, that stuff is a little more out there, right? When it comes to talking with somebody like Gabe, who, I was going to say is a little more serious about that, but those are serious topics. It's just they're definitely more fringe, I think, than the series goes into that wants to explore. The series wants answers.
Yeah, but it's woven into the narrative so well. It's real no stone left unturned thing. And I didn't get to say it when we were in the interview, but you guys, my favorite chapter title is Space Potatoes. Chapter 6. Space Potatoes.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. We are not blowing smoke. We want to hear your opinions, folks. If you dig our show, you will love Obscurum. And the community is a big part of this. So send us your stories of strange things in the sky. You can find us via email. You can find us on a telephonic device of your choice, hopefully. Or you can hit us on the lines, online, on the internet.
Indeed. You can find us at the handle Conspiracy Stuff, where we exist on Facebook with our Facebook group. Here's where it gets crazy, on YouTube with video content galore for your perusing enjoyment, and on X, FKA Twitter. On Instagram and TikTok, however, we're Conspiracy Stuff Show.
We have a phone number. You can call this number and leave us a voicemail. Our number is 1-833-STDWYTK. When you call in that message, give yourself a cool nickname and let us know if we can use your name and message on the air. If you've got more to say than can fit in a 3-minute voicemail, why not instead send us a good old-fashioned email? We are
the entities that read every piece of correspondence we receive. Be well aware, yet unafraid. Sometimes the void writes back. Wait, are you kidding? Is this a weird bit? Did I listen to the end of this show for no reason at all? There's one way to find out. Drop us a line, conspiracy@iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.